This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. Welcome back to The Forging Table. The mission of Undaunted.Life is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. At The Forging Table, you'll see a group of regular guys digging in to God's Word, and we're welcoming all of you to come along on that journey with us. That's Jake, that's Eric, and don't call it a comeback. That is Matt Grassmeyer. He has not been here for a very, very long time. Matt, do you want to explain why you don't like us or The Forging Table anymore?
Well, I don't know that we have enough time.
Let's just get into it. I mean, we got it roughly an hour, and we don't have anything to cover.
No, I've just been super busy. Life has been busy, kids, work, just life in general has been busy. And so it just so happens that a lot of the dates that have been thrown out have just not worked with my paper schedule.
Yeah, so to give you all a little peek behind the curtain, kind of the way we do it, because there's four OGs. So there's Matt, there's Eric, there's Zach Todd, and unfortunately Ryan Horn. And then Winkler, you've kind of, amoeba'd your way somehow into this inner circle. And so you're kind of in that.
He's the best, man. He's amazing.
It's hard to be sneaky at this size, Kyle.
I've already caught him looking at himself on the monitor twice in this one episode, and it was the only thing I told you to stop doing. So, you know what? We're off the rails from the beginning here. But what I do is I send out a message to the guys, and we record these 2 or 3 months in advance. So that's why we don't talk news cycle, or for any of you guys that are wondering why don't we talk news cycle on this. And so I send it to OGs first, and I try to get like two of this inner circle OGs on the episode, and then I'll try to do a rotation of some of the other guys that, you guys have heard and seen on the show, right? And then like sometimes, Ryan, he's always usually the first to respond. He's down, he's ready to go, but I don't want him doing more than 2 in a row, right? Just because I want him to kind of have a break, do his own Bible study, take care of mama and the babies and all that kind of stuff. And so just the way the cookie crumbled, yeah, literally every date that I sent Matt for like 5 or 6 months in a row, it was like, absolutely not. And I was just like, I don't know what I did or what I said or what I was wearing, but whatever it was, it made him just completely disengage from us. Yep. Jake, do you have any insight here?
I don't have any insight. I've missed his folksy wisdom.
And the buttery smooth.
I know.
I know.
All right, let me just go ahead and admit it. It's because of the buttery smoothness than my jealousy. I've made sure that he's not available.
I have a bit of a confession to make. There was one time where I knew as soon as you sent the text that I couldn't do it, but I felt bad.
Gosh.
It's okay.
To those just listening.
Hey, it's okay. It's okay. Just like
it's the new orientation.
Just like that computer just got washed by that water, we're about to get washed in the Word.
Let's go.
We should get into it.
Those are those folksy transitions that we have been missing out on. So I would hate to talk about anything else other than getting right into the text, but I do feel the need to ask, are you okay, Eric?
I'm okay.
Do you need a napkin? Do you need a paper towel?
I see a few drops. It's okay.
Okay, here, we'll get
some paper here.
Okay, today we're going to be getting into Genesis 20 and 21. So again, guys, as we've been going through Genesis, sometimes we're doing 1 chapter, sometimes we're doing 2. I think we've done 3 once or twice, but that's just kind of the way the cookie crumbled. But with this one, we're going to go ahead and start with Genesis 20. We're going to hit the first 7 verses of Genesis 20. Winkler, lead us off.
From there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negeb and lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "Behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife." Now Abimelech had not approached her. So he said, "Lord, will you kill an innocent people? Did he not himself say to me, she is my sister?" And she herself said, "He is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I have done this." Then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know that you have done this in the integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, so that he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not return her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours."
Quite a warning there at the end, coming from God. I think you should probably take his advice here. But one thing from the beginning, I was like, bro, again?
Yeah, old habits die hard.
Yeah.
Right
like
here.
what? We don't get any insight here in the text as to what in the world was he thinking. But guys, what in the world was he thinking?
Yeah.
Like I don't really, again, I think all of us at this table have made stupid mistakes twice in the same category of sin. Okay. Mm-hmm. I'll at least say that I have. But here it's like, she's your sister? Like that's a very specific one that is happening over and over here.
Yeah, this is ridiculous. I mean, especially when you start thinking about, okay, you can somewhat understand his fear of Pharaoh and Egypt, big superpower, large army, high tech. This is some like really small kingdom within Canaan. I mean, this is not anything. This is not a big deal. And yet he's doing the same exact thing. It does not make sense, especially when you start thinking about how soon after the destruction of Sodom was this. It's like you really don't. You just saw God destroy Sodom and Sodom and Gomorrah, and yet now you're here in this little kingdom, and you go, "Yeah, I'm afraid again."
Well, Matt, I know you said it as a joke, but you're like, old habits die hard. It almost feels like he's just in the habit of this particular rather egregious seeming sin.
Yeah, I think Abraham is just a really good picture of us as believers, the nation of Israel, being a stiff-necked people, us being fickle, and us being really quick to forget the things that God has blessed us in or with. And I think a lot of times our ego just takes over and we try to out God. We think we know better. And I think this is just a perfect example of that. But the good news is Abraham is just a great picture of God's favor, not because of what Abraham has done, but in spite of what he has done. And isn't that just beautiful that we can rest in that? It's not what we've done. We receive grace by faith, not of our works. And Abraham is like one of the ultimate examples of that.
I mean, he's in the hall of faith, right? And so how much faith did it take for him to literally leave the comforts of his home and where he was to go into literally Never Land based on a promise? So it's funny to me that he takes this huge leap of faith, but then when he's still under that promise, he's having a hard time like with these small things.
What chapter was Never Land? Was that like 17, 16? I missed it.
It's the book of Walt.
Got it.
Nailed it.
Appreciate that. Sorry, go ahead. That was not even a great joke, and I interrupted you for it. So keep going.
Right. And I just look at my own life as I know that I've got short-term memory loss. I feel like you said, it's like I get it. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna change. I'm gonna be different. I'm gonna be different than I am for maybe 2 weeks, and then it's like I tend to fall back. I mean, I think one of the things that we see throughout Scripture, especially the Old Testament, is this setting up of monuments, of altars, of rocks, of things. They did that for a reason, so they could teach their children, but also so they could have a continual remembrance of what God has done, so they wouldn't fall back into thinking that God was an unfaithful God.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think too here, like this is just kind of an underplayed theme, but like this is another example of Abraham kind of throwing his wife Sarah under the bus. Like you're not protecting her because you think you know best, and you're literally giving her over to become a part of this king's harem of wives. Like because you're saying she's my sister, because you're afraid that you're going to die and she's going to get abducted or like, taken as a slave, but like you're literally just proactively giving her over as essentially that.
And in that moment, you're basically leading your family or your wife into sin, right? It's like, hey, we got to do this thing. You got to do this thing for me, right? When he says this, you say this. That's not a good way to lead.
Yeah. I always, the thing that I always find so remarkable in Genesis is just how frequently we see both wickedness and righteousness growing together at the same time, sometimes within the same family, sometimes within the same society, and in this case, and in Abraham's case, within the same person. This is the first time, these first 7 verses, this is the first time the word prophet is used in the Bible. Abraham is, and God calls him a prophet after he gives Sarah over again. He's warning Abimelech, God is, and God calls him a prophet. Again, just marvel at the grace of God here, that he's going after somebody commits this horribly wicked act where he turns his wife over to a king to be a part of her harem. He still says he's a prophet.
Yeah. Look, and you may have said this earlier, Matt, like stark contrast. I mean, it's so it's so interesting that God puts these folks, Abraham and others, into the hall of faith, clearly fallen. Clearly they still struggle. But then we see the person of Jesus who from the womb to the tomb never had an issue wavering in his faith.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that I think is interesting as well is verse 3, but God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him. So we've had quite a few discussions on this table about election and, what's the difference here between like free will and all that kind of stuff. But then one of the things that's unexplainable, I guess, for the ardent, non-tulip 5-point person, for the ardent person who's like, that's just not it. It's like, can you please explain dreams to me in the Middle East? Right? Can you please explain people that are coming to faith in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and all these other different places whenever Jesus is literally visiting these people in their dreams and like communicating to them? And so people don't need to hear like, okay, we don't need to be doing mission work because, the God will just show up in dreams. But it's like, that was one of the first things I thought about is what God is doing with Muslims in these places where you can't have street preachers. You can't have people handing out New Testaments. You can't have people like doing church services. And the underground church in dominant Muslim, and not just Muslim, but Islamist, like fundamentalist, will cut your head off and roll it down the street in front of your family. Like in these types of countries where God is still moving. It's like, if God wants it done, God's going to get it done. So that stood out for me here on verse 3.
Well, isn't that kind of just to me, that just solidifies tulip. Like if I can't get there, if we can't get there to preach to these people who are ardent and, like jihadist Islamists who like want to kill Christians, and then their God or Jesus is coming to them in a dream, it's because he has elected them to be a part of his people. To me, that just solidifies God's sovereignty over the whole thing. And it is cool. So I guess I would say what would you say is, you said, I'd like to hear somebody explain that. What do you mean by that?
So to the person that is ardently, we'll just say like anti-tulip, like anti-reformed, like to that person, it's like, okay.
Would it be anti-all tulip or would it just be
Yeah, I should probably be a little bit more precise. I should probably be more precise. Anti-tulip as a singular category. So it's like you take all 5 or you take none, like that type of person. Because I know people that have problems with, limited atonement, problems with all that. Like that's probably the number 1 of the 5 that people have the most problems with. But for someone who's just like, Reformed theology just isn't real, like all that, like they have problems with it. I want to know what they would say about what's happening in the Middle East. If that makes more sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I misunderstood what you're saying. That makes perfect sense.
I might have a theory.
Let's go.
It would go into the spiritual gifts. And does God still reveal himself through prophecy to, through a dream to people? Like, is that a possibility? I don't know that it necessarily means that there is an unconditional election or limited. I don't know if it's anything like that. It could just be as simple as this is person who maybe has this spiritual gifting, and so they are getting that revealed to them.
The gift of like being able to discern a dream, or the gift of Okay, so who's read Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, Nabil Qureshi?
Not yet.
Okay, so that's a fantastic one.
good,
You definitely need to have it. It's on our book list. 100 books every modern Christian man should read list. Undaunted.Life/book list. By the way, do you know it's not /book list? I got like a tongue lashing from like a tech guy over email. He's like, actually, it's // I was like, oh my gosh. How many hundreds of times have I said / this, that, or the other? So guys, just so you know, all you tech guys out there, I am so sorry. I did not mean to offend you. I'm looking directly at camera 1, camera 2, camera 1, camera 2. I am so sorry. But just Undaunted.Life/book list, I think they'll be able to get there from there. But Nabil in that book, I can't remember. So I was trying to ask you guys. So Jesus comes to Nabil. So just to kind of give you a heads up, Jake, Nabil had a Christian buddy in college, and they're both intellectual giants, these two, right? And so they kind of are going back and forth on Jesus and all that type of stuff. And, Nabil is very ardently pro-Muslim in his disposition and his argumentation and apologetics and all that stuff. He's on lock. But Jesus,
he was taught that. Like he
Correct.
came to America, and part of his thing was like, I want to convert. I want people to convert to
Islam.
To Islam.
Right.
Like, and he was brought, like, he was trained in that. It wasn't just he was some
Right.
guy who came over here and was like, oh, I have this buddy. Like, he was trained in that.
Right. And he wasn't just like reading Muslim apologetics books because he thought, oh, this is interesting. He's like, no, I'm going to use these. But what I can't remember, I do know that Jesus came to Nabil in a dream. I can't remember if Nabil converted immediately or not, like as he awoke, or if there was a delay.
Here's what I remember, and there may be multiple times that he was kind of quote unquote visited in different ways, but I do remember a dream that he had, and he did not know how to interpret it, but he did have an aunt. It's his aunt or his mother, I can't remember who it was, and she knew that because that within the Muslim religion there was like a book that interprets dreams based on symbolism, things that show up in your dreams.
That's right.
Right. And so he was like reluctant because he was like, I don't really want to talk to her about this because it may give away something, like I'm, thinking about becoming a Christian or whatever, because he had gotten that far. But he ends up going and talking to her, and he's like, well, I had this thing and I saw this. And she was like, well, that means such and such. And it was like 4 or 5 different things that she basically revealed to him, and he was just blown away. He's like, that is the person of Jesus.
So I guess my point there was there's still a discernment process, and there's still, like, again, that tug and pull between God's sovereignty and our free will.
Right.
And you can wake up from the dream and still reject it, right? You can still wake up from the dream and choose to harden your heart further, right? And at some point, God's going to be like, okay, have it your way. Yeah. And then you'll be completely hardened from that. Let's go ahead and move on in Genesis 20 as well. Matt, if you will do 8 through, let's just finish the chapter. Finish chapter 20, starting in verse 8.
Sure. So Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all his servants and told them all these things. And the men were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you see that you did this thing? Abraham said, I did it because I thought, there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God caused me to wander from my father's house, I said to her, this is the kindness you must do to me. At every place to which we come, say of me, he is my brother. Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male servants and female servants and gave them to Abraham, and he returned Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, behold, my land is before you, dwell where it pleases you. To Sarah he said, behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is a sign of your innocence in the eyes of all who are with you, and before everyone you are vindicated. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, and also healed his wife and female slaves so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife.
So I guess one of the first things that stood out to me here is, Abraham, he's the one that's called by God. He's the one that's sent out, and he's the one that's obviously continuing to lie and continuing to have some issues. Like, he gets rebuked by a heathen, pagan, aristocratic figure, right? And I tried to think of a modern corollary of somebody, that's, high in the church or something like that is being rejected or rebuked in public. I guess you could say the modern Pope, basically anytime the Pope opens his stupid, dirty mouth, it's either, I almost said something really, really rude, but I'm going to kind of dial that back just a little bit. But he'll say something and he'll be rebuked by atheists in culture that are just like, hey bro, I've read your Bible. I think it's all garbage and trash, but literally what you just said doesn't jive with your Bible. What is wrong with you?
Right.
And it seems like that's kind of a thing that's happening right here. It's like, bro, how can you be so far off where it's the pagan guy that's like, hey man, what's your deal here?
Mm-hmm. Well, you got a healthy fear of God, I think, when he had that dream. I mean, I'm sure it shook him up a little bit, which is ironic since Abraham was like, well, I didn't perceive there was any fear here, but God sure put it in him, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the Abimelech here, I mean, there's some fear that I would say is not, there's probably a godly fear just because he did come to him in a dream, but throughout ancient Asia.
I mean, he said, "You're a dead man."
Yeah, he did. I mean, it's understandable. But throughout
Pretty
ancient
direct.
Asia, like the adultery was like, I mean, in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Canaan, adultery is regularly referred to as the great sin and is considered extremely detrimental to society to the extent that it is characteristic of anarchy. So Hittite laws, Middle Assyrian laws, and the Code of Hammurabi all contain legislation against adultery. So in a very real way, Abimelech is sitting here going, I had no intention of committing this sin, and yet it's thrust upon me because of your deceit. And his initial instinct, after finding all this out, after God reveals it to him in a dream, his initial instinct is, I've got to make this right. And he's probably not going by what would be considered godly law in terms of making this right. He's making it right in the way that his laws would say you have to make this right. But I do think that there's a little bit of an aspect of Abraham himself, because he was called a prophet, it's being revealed to Abimelech that Abraham has the ability to intercede on your behalf. Yeah. He can intercede with me. So if God has closed all the wombs, Abraham, and interestingly enough, God opens the wombs and now they can have children again. But interestingly enough, this is where Isaac still hasn't come yet. And so this is once again God showing Abraham, I have the power over fertility and infertility, just revealing it over and over again. But I think that, I think Abimelech is making amends here, but I don't know that he's necessarily making an amends based upon trying to follow some sort of godly purpose.
Well, I mean, you see as the womb is being closed, I mean, see a lineage being cut off. And I was thinking like he's a dead man, because if he's a dead man, I mean, if you can't produce boys or whatever to supersede him or whatever, then that becomes a problem, right? So, I mean, absolutely. Whether he has a godly fear or not, he sees something that's a result of his actions, even though they're unbeknownst to him, and he's going to make it right. You're right.
I think it's interesting that Abraham kind of even tries to justify his sin a little bit there, or not a little bit. He does, and he's even saying like, well, I wasn't technically lying. Like, she is my sister. It's like, man, come on, man.
It's like we're splitting hairs here. It's like if you start, we'll say, well, actually, it's like I don't think I'm going to enjoy much of what.
Yeah, that was definitely an moment for Abraham for sure.
Well, and I wonder as well, this might be a hint as to why Abraham is thinking the way that he is. So verse 11, Abraham said, I did it because I thought there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. I mean, Matt, you said earlier, this isn't that long after Sodom and Gomorrah. I tried to look up just how long after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah this was, and I couldn't get a clear answer, but it's not that long. It's not that long after that. And so it's almost like
it's one chapter away.
Yeah, it's almost like he
it's like,
what is that, like 3 minutes?
It's like less than 20 sentences.
Hey, but in the early parts of Genesis, that could be billions of years, as we talked about, right, Jake?
That's right.
And you know what? By the way, Ryan's not here for me to give him this one, but Mr. There's no dragons in the Bible. Well, guess what? AI Bible went in and did Genesis 3, and you know what they think the serpent looked like? A daggum dragon. Okay?
I know this is really off topic, but why does he not think that there are dragons in the Bible?
Who was here? Was anyone here when Ryan? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So
It was you and I.
Yeah.
okay. And so yeah, basically it was just Ryan. Why? What was his
Not
thing?
have a good reason. There was no good reason.
He just said, because I'm the one that brought up the dragon thing. Because the question that I asked is because whenever God was like, okay, you will now, toil and be on your stomach and all that, I was like, okay, it seems because the word serpent used here, it just means reptile, large reptile of some kind. Yeah. And so it's like, okay, could this reptile have had wings and arms and legs at this time? And then it was like all of a sudden zip zap, now you are literally just on your belly. Now you are a serpent and things like that. And we have all these dragon, we have these disparate cultures that apparently had no way of communicating with one another that all have their own depictions of winged evil lizards flying around, torturing people and all that. And Ryan wanted none of it. Like, I can't believe we're talking about him and he's not even here, because when he's here, he's just like, he tries to run the whole thing.
Sorry, that's
you know?
my fault. That's interesting.
No, this is good. I think we should talk about him behind his back even more, okay? Because he is the forging tabler that Joby loved, which he loves to remind us all the time of. But yeah, he was like vehemently anti-dragon, and I think it was just because he's like, yeah, Moody commentary doesn't say it was a dragon.
Well, he's in good company. Jesus is anti-dragon too, so, and he kills the dragon. So
no, he's anti that.
No, I know.
There was a dragon. I know, right? He would love to be Team Jesus here, but hey, where's everyone's thoughts here on dragons?
I love dragons.
Genesis.
I'm in for dragons.
You think it was a dragon?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I don't think I could say there's definitive proof that it was a dragon, but the context clue there of like, now you will, crawl on your belly. Does give some clue as to, okay, there was a pre-existing appendages that he was
right. He wasn't dragging around on his belly.
I've said it before, but the first fossil discoveries were not until like the 1600s. And yet you had all of these cultural histories throughout the world who had dragons depicted in various stories, books, wall paintings, whatever you want to call them. Dragons are everywhere, all across the world.
With people in the same renderings.
Correct.
Right.
And you're kind of going, okay, well, I don't know how all of them could have such a vivid, similar imagination. It just seems, a lot of the things that we take on faith in the Bible, a lot of times you could just kind of start going like, just the idea of creation, the odds of the entire world being created from nothing, the odds of that would be astronomically small. Okay, well, let's play this same game with dragons. Astronomically small, that all these different disparate cultures who don't share very many things in common have that in common. Mm. And nobody discovered any fossil records that they could have said, oh, well, we found these bones that look like giant lizards and let's make this character out of it.
Let's talk about giant bone lizard things, okay? There is a school of thought. I've gone way too far down this. Did you just look at me like a disappointed father?
No, I did not.
We might as well bring Zach Todd into this conversation because he looks at me that way all the time. Do you know what it's like hanging out with Zach Todd? It's like that. He just looks at me like, I can't believe I have such dumb friends every time I open my mouth. But
he did that with me a lot on the Noah discussion.
Yeah, well, so one of the theories as to why we have not found winged lizard-like dragon things is for the same reason that you don't feed your dogs chicken bones, right? Why don't you feed your dogs chicken bones?
Split.
They split. Yeah. They fray too easily, and so they'll get into their digestive tract and they kind of come to pieces. But you can give them bones of, you can give them antlers, you can give them like ham bones, you can give them all these other different things, and it doesn't come apart the same. So a lot of people are like, if a dragon were to die and it was kind of more in like the bird, whatever, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, whatever thing, right? If it was more in the bird side of things, there's no way those could fossilize to where we could find them because they would have been too big and they would have just like split to pieces over time or something like that. And so that's why we haven't found any evidentiary basis fossil-wise.
If the wings are made of cartilage primarily, those wouldn't preserve.
Right. Yeah. Those wouldn't preserve. But haven't they found like ancient birds?
Yeah. There's a pterodactyl right there. That was my favorite of all the dinosaurs.
Is that where Arc'teryx gets their logo?
Oh,
is an Arc'teryx a thing?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a thing, right?
A thing.
That was like a dinosaur, right?
Yeah, it's a dinosaur bird.
Which, by the way, if you're going to name your company,
Archaeopteryx is, I believe, the name.
Hey, if you're going to name your company after something that no one can spell and no one can pronounce unless they go into some sort of like super duper dude bro like outdoor shop and hear someone else say it, like, come on guys, like help. Even though most people can't spell Undaunted, I've found. So there is that as well.
Wow, that's surprising to me. Very surprising.
It kind of is what it is. So
sound it out.
Is this your phone?
Did you just knock it on the ground?
No, I touched it with my foot. There. Like I have my feet under my own chair. And why is your phone?
I don't know.
Is that where you put your phone? You're like, all right,
sometimes.
I'm definitely not going to be tempted to look at it if it's under Kyle's feet.
This has been derailed very successfully.
This is one of the worst ones I think that we've done. But hey, guess what? Guess what? We can save it. We can save it, guys. Anything else on Genesis 20 before we move on?
I think 21's on deck.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Excited?
I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this. So like he says he's going to give he's saying, talking to Sarah, Abimelech is, I am giving your brother 1,000 pieces of silver as a sign of your innocence in all who are with you. That's interesting. Just the opposite being true, obviously, for Judas. And I wonder what your guys' thoughts are on there. Like, is there, and I haven't looked into this at all, but is there any significance into silver being, looked upon as something like that. Like,
isn't silver more useful than gold? Because gold is like what we see as most valuable, but it's basically worthless as a metal. Like it's very pretty, but like as in use, like you don't have like golden tools, you don't have like golden stuff. Like it's too soft of a metal. But so I think silver is more usable, more valuable.
Yeah, I just found that really intriguing. Like the silver, you having silver will be a sign of your innocence. I don't know if you guys.
I did not pick up on that.
Not me neither.
I did found out that apparently on Neptune it rains diamonds. Did you know that? Just random.
Where
are we
at?
Pulling out random stuff here? That is not, what does that have to do with Matt discussing
The human
silver
head weighs
and
8 pounds.
Hey, do you know the mammal with the longest gestation period is an elephant, 22 months? Did you know that?
No, bees and dogs can smell fear.
I think Eric is just trying to tie into the fact that Neptune is obviously a very stressful place. There's a lot of pressure on Neptune. And pressure
to
makes
perform.
diamonds.
Yeah, pressure makes diamonds.
And just like us, God will bring us through our stress and pressure.
Tied into 21. Keep going, Matt.
And
Keep
he
going.
will,
Tied into
crown
21.
us with
had
1,000
something on
pieces of
20.
silver because in Christ we are viewed as innocent as
Yeah,
well.
tied into 21. Tied in.
Oh, because that's the promise.
That's a promise. Speaking
child
of
of promise.
promises, that is so interesting that you would say that. Hey, Eric, if you don't mind, I don't know if you're diamond researcher. Are you good at the moment? If you're looking at he's on Zales.com currently, guys. So hopefully Lady Browning is going to be getting something out of all this.
From Neptune.
From Neptune. She's getting diamonds from Neptune?
Would be amazing. I bet you.
Holy Moses. Okay, how about we go ahead and do Genesis 21? Let's just do the first 7 verses. Just start simple.
I can do it. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whose Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham and Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age.
So I thought I was old when I became a dad at like 33 years old. So slightly different circumstances here. But one thing that I would point out before we really dig in, because I mean, obviously there's a whole lot here. And a lot of secularists and other people, Jordan Peterson's pointed this out, but some of the deepest stories, right? And when I use the word story, meaning like a description of a historical record, those types of things, where we get some of the deepest and most meaning in terms of even how we look at things today, come in some of the shortest passages of the Old Testament, right? So look at Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel, that entire story, I think is 4 or 5 verses. I mean, what all is in there? Like the depth of just the Cain and Abel story is almost hard to wrap our minds around. Same thing here. Like how much is just in 7 verses and kind of look at what God can do. And so I guess for me, like I won't speak for you guys, I'll speak for me. The significance of what is in these verses is for what it points to. It's not all encapsulated in these verses, but it's the same thing like when people are like, don't look at the early part of Genesis as a taxonomy textbook or a chemistry textbook or a biology textbook. It's not describing everything, but it's describing kind of the ultimate clarifying points about, hey, where do we get meaning and stuff from?
Redemptive history is what we're going for here. And so like Cain and Abel is an interesting one because right after God says, through your offspring, basically the serpent's head will be crushed. And then Cain and Abel happen. You're like, wait a minute.
Dadgummit.
What? If you're like rooting against the story, you're like, yes, there's strife. And then God's like, nah, but there's this dude named Seth. He's going to be the dude that, continues the line. And so there's a lot of, like you were saying, like there's a lot of like meat in there. And I think sometimes we miss it, but so it's good to call that out. And here's one of those examples as well, just as God has promised.
Well, guys, I know you.
Isaac.
You were excited to talk about it, so let's get into the birth of Isaac.
Well, I was going to say the brevity of the actual discussion, because you got to think about how long have we been talking about waiting for, anticipating the birth of Isaac throughout Genesis since the first covenant was made with Abraham. How long have we been waiting? And then we hit chapter 21. and it's literally given a sentence. And I started thinking, the brevity of this almost just makes it like it's reinforcing how easy this was for God to do. I don't need to go on and on about how I did this because I can do it. And I read this last night in one of the comments. What God does should never cease to amaze us, but that he consistently shows himself capable of doing what he does without apparent effort is strikingly commonplace and entirely unremarkable. He is God, enough said. Why should we be astounded? The text, for its part, is appropriately nonchalant. Are we impressed? By all means. Yes. Surprised? Decidedly not.
Nice.
We shouldn't be surprised. God came through. I mean, it's just go outside and you look at creation and you're going, we just see it all and it just works and everything. But do you ever marvel at it? I brought this up before. When we make these scientific discoveries and we're just like, whoa, look at this. We just discovered this new star or new planet or whatever. And yet it's been there all along. We just didn't know. And we think we're remarkable for discovering it. And yet the person who actually created it and did everything, that's what's remarkable. That's the remarkable part of it. But should we be shocked that all of this stuff just works? No, not. God can do whatever he wants.
I like I like how Sarah responds. You can tell it just has a deep impact on her.
Yeah.
You know, that she's just laughing. Yeah. Of course, doesn't Isaac's name mean laughter? Is that right? It reminds me also of David whenever they were bringing the ark back in. He just was so overjoyed that he went around dancing in the streets. I think about the experience. You know, when I was telling this to somebody the other day, like you can have apologetic discussions with people, and eventually you get to kind of like there's just an endpoint. It's like you guys are just going to agree to disagree on certain things potentially. But one thing that nobody can ever take away from you is your experience with the Lord and what God has done in your life. That whether someone believes it or not, that's their thing. But I know, and certainly Sarah knew, and David knew what God had done, and it was amazing to them.
Yep.
Yeah, I think like to Jake's point, like A.W. Tozer, I think he said, what we think about God is the most important thing about us. And if we believe that God does what he says he does, will do what he says he's going to do, we shouldn't be surprised. But to your point, like I'm going to say, is we should be in awe of that. And I think sometimes we can, just be distracted or let ourselves or not be intentional to see those things. So I think this is a good call to that of, hey, yes, we believe that God does and can do all these things, but we should marvel at that.
One here, before long, we're going to be really digging into the psyche of Abraham whenever God calls him to do something that's just hard to even realize. But even in these verses, what's that?
Don't spoil it.
Yeah, no spoilers here, guys. Don't go to season 2 yet until you finish season 1. But I just, as I read through this passage again with its brevity, that's what I like, right? So it's like, no, let's get to the point. Let's get to the high points. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to verse 8. Like, blah, blah, let's keep this train moving. But like whenever I do sit in this verse, in this group of verses here for a little bit, I'm just like, man, what was he thinking when things were quiet, right? For all these years. And like the level of doubt that he had versus the faith and the wrestling and the whispers that he's getting about, hey, God's not going to pull through. You got to take care of this yourself. Obviously, his wife has a brilliant idea that she is later mad about herself, which is just like the most chick thing ever, to where it's like, this was your idea. It blows up in your face, and now you're the one that's mad at me about it. That's interesting. And so like all of this has happened, right? And I mean, we're talking about decades at this point, right? Because we're going to talk more about Ishmael here in a second. And, this kid has been around for a very, very long time. There's going to be some tension between him and this new kiddo and that type of a thing. But that's what I just got stuck on with this first part here. It's like, well, what was he thinking when it actually did happen? Because there's got to be some level of disbelief. I mean, even in church this morning, we had one of our other preachers, not Mark Hitchcock, preach, and he was just talking about when you take your first baby home for the first time. And it's like you get inside your house, and whether you have a dog or whether you have anything else like that, there's a new thing in your house, and you're just like, this isn't real. Like, I've got a new human being that if they die, go to prison. Like, this is like, how did I get here? And like, I just wonder what Abraham was thinking in these moments. Like, how did this happen? How did I actually get here? That's like the real tangible part about this.
Sure, man. Well, now there was a point in there. This is the first circumcision, isn't it? Is that right? I think it's the first circumcision in the Bible.
Well, but Abraham had to circumcise himself.
Did he?
I think before that they talked about a group of people that were
Maybe
circumcised. The first individual person.
Maybe it
talked
was the first individual
Let's see what the internet says. You keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just making note that was a sign of the covenant from Genesis 17. So maybe that's where you find it. I don't know. And then I wrote down that was to set them apart, and it was a shadow of the new covenant. And I liked this because I was thinking, why did I get circumcised when I was a kid? Is that necessary? But here's the.
If anybody was wondering if Browning was circumcised or not.
Now you know.
There you go.
Romans 8:28-29 says, "For no one is a Jew who is merely outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical, but a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God."
Looks like Genesis 17 is the first time circumcision is brought in.
That's when God is like telling him, right? Isn't that the
Genesis 17, 10 through 11.
instructions?
This is my covenant, this is King James, y'all, which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you, man-child, love that. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised, and ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. So Abraham was circumcised at the ripe old age of 99, and Ishmael, his son, at the age of 13, and then all the males of Abraham's household. That was described a little bit later in Genesis 17.
Yeah.
So the first baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, looks to be the case.
Interestingly, after 8 days, and this was, I think I brought this up on a previous podcast, but 8 days is still the standard. Like you're supposed, and believe it or not, in the 1960s, they discovered that a child's blood clots, their blood clotting is at its peak at 8 days old. So he circumcises him at 8 days. There's literally, like, if you wanted to go, when would be the best time to do this? God told you it's 8 days, 8 days old. That's when he did it to Isaac, because that's when their blood clot will actually, it'll clot faster, so they will heal faster.
That's so interesting.
That army would have loved to have known that before they circumcised themselves and got defeated, right?
Probably right. I bet they wish they could go back to when they were 8 days old and get that all squared away. Hey, guys, anything else on the birth of Isaac before we move on? Chapter 21?
I think, again, I just would call to the redemptive history that God tells us in chapter 3 of Genesis, that through you, I will crush the serpent's head. Like, it's coming. And I mean, Isaac is a monumental birth in God's redemptive history for us. And so, yeah, that is something to just celebrate and just be so thankful for.
No better way to put a bow on the birth of Isaac. So Eric, shut up. Winkler, shut up. But hey, Winkler, don't shut up for too long because you got to read now. So let's get into verses 8 through 21 of Genesis 21.
And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." And the thing that was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Let me not look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt.
So all you bow hunters out there, you love this section, but there was something here that I don't know if this was a distraction for me from this section, because there's certainly more to get from it. But, in this section, Ishmael, he's, probably 16 or 17 years old, but Ishmael is seen as one of, he's on the Mount Rushmore of patriarchs of the Islamic faith. Okay. And so every time I see this here, because if you're not aware, obviously when we get to this, the Christian and Jewish belief is that Abraham took his son Isaac up, and that was the sacrifice he was going to make before God, stayed his hand. But the Muslim faith maintains that it wasn't Isaac, that it was Ishmael. And so Ishmael is the Islamic tradition comes right off of Ishmael's line. So when you hear people talk about how they're saying some of the same characters in the Old Testament and in the Quran and stuff like that, like Ishmael is one of them. So I'm a little bit confused here at God's protection over Ishmael, because the ultimate battle that I think that we're coming to is not, it's not a worldview of, conservatism and liberalism, or, conservatism and wokeism, or leftism, any of that type of stuff. Like, it's Christianity and Islam, right? Like that's the ultimate battle that we're all going for. And it's like the ultimate false God versus the one true God. And so I don't know if any of y'all have really looked into that any further, because that just, it kind of hung me up a little bit, and I didn't really come to a place of understanding as to, okay, God, why do you keep, doing something knowing that, he's going to create this line of people that are going to eventually cut off your followers' heads?
I mean, if you really want to go down the sovereignty route, interestingly enough, I think the savior of at end times, I believe the Islamic savior is supposed to rule for 7 years. I believe. Oh,
like in their end time story.
Yes, in their end time story.
The imam, like the one they've been waiting for.
Yes, or something like that. Like, essentially, it syncs up with what we would call the Antichrist. Mm-hmm. And so there's some synergies there. So if you wanted to go, okay, why? If you wanted to go into the great plan and the sovereignty argument, you could make a pretty distinct line there. I kind of looked at the same thing, Kyle, because I started going okay, well, you have Isaac, who's literally the stump, the stump of the Jewish faith, and then you have Ishmael, who's the stump of the Islamic faith, and then you just kind of see this grow over time, and it's all rooted in the polygamous relationship of Abraham. It's all rooted in his sin.
Right.
It's all rooted there. That essentially we have been embroiled in centuries, eons of conflict, and it predates even the founding of the Islamic faith. It's not like the Persians were super friendly before Muhammad came along. There's been conflict forever, and yet it's all rooted in this one act. One act of Abraham could not just look at God and believe him.
Yeah, it was bigger. That's the ultimate point. It was bigger than just he went outside of his marriage because his wife suggested, "Hey, you want to bring in a third lady?" And he's like, "Howdy do." It was that he just didn't believe in the promise. And I looked up a little bit here. Islamic eschatology does include the expectation of a redeemer figure, commonly known as the Mahdi, who is foretold to appear before the day of judgment to restore justice. In some hadith, so the hadith is the traditions that come off of the Quran, so it's more Muslim traditions. In some hadith narrations, it is mentioned that the Mahdi's period of leadership or rule will last for 7 years. However, there are a few important points of note anyway. There's different schools of thought with eschatology and the different dogma there, but that's kind of what you were getting at. And so I don't know how to weave all these things together. Maybe that's a Mark Hitchcock thing, that he can come on and kind of weave that all together, because there are people that see no connection with the end times and the battle of good and evil being between Christianity and Islam, or Jesus and Muhammad, or however they want to couch it. But anyway, Matt, you look like you're ready to fire off. Let's go.
Not on that. I think there's a lot to be discussed there. We'll probably need a lot more time, and probably people who have studied Revelation thoroughly, Pastor Hitchcock. I think one thing that's interesting here is Ishmael is not punished for the sin of his father. So he is obviously a sinful birth in terms of like he happened outside of what God had ordained as this covenantal marriage between Abraham and Sarah. God promises to make Abraham a great nation and his offspring to be a great nation. Isn't it interesting that Ishmael is not killed because of what David did? I don't know, that just stuck out to me as someone who is very pro-life, and as we kind of run in some pro-life circles. That's
Abraham, not David, but
sorry. Thank you.
Good, but keep going.
Did I say David?
Yeah, it's all good.
Wow,
That's all right.
that's just an interesting thing that he's not killed because of.
It's weird that you said David, because literally sitting in church this morning, I was thinking about Abraham and Isaac and Ishmael, and then I was thinking about the tribe of Judah, and then I was thinking about David and Bathsheba, and that's in the line of the tribe of Judah. And then at the end of that line is the lion of the tribe of Judah, which is Jesus. Right. And it's like, if you look through Jesus's family tree, it's nasty. Yeah, like there's murderers and rapists and whores, and like it is like, it's not what you would expect, right? Because it's like, hey, who do we all want our sons and daughters to marry? We want them to marry nice boys and girls and nice families and, all that type of stuff. And it's just like, you just don't get this clean story. That's another one of the appeals of the Christian stories. It's like, no, it wasn't Peter that saw the empty tomb and told everyone about it. It was the ladies who had no rights at that time, and no one would have taken them seriously. And it's all this stuff that you wouldn't have put in there if you were trying to make yourself and the faith look better. You
definitely would have put these people who did everything right, who never messed up, never sinned. But whatever, like you would have just had these perfect people. And God is like, I'm going to take these crooked pencils and draw straight lines. And that's just all throughout the Bible. And Abraham, he does some dumb stuff. And we can look back, through our modern lens and go, man, what a dummy. But isn't that all of us? Like, we do some dumb stuff.
I had a thought, from the very beginning, imagine the dragon turning into the snake and, going away and being like, I am literally going to wreck this world, and from that point on, just trying to strategize in all these different ways to try to, even, as early as Abimelech, getting into his mind and being like, you need to take this woman and have sex with her, and God having to then come in and restrain Abimelech from doing that thing so that he can preserve that line that he wants, right? And preserve the promise that he's given Abraham. And I think it goes on and on and on. We see that all the way through Jesus. And now it's just kind of, I imagine like Satan's just trying to delay the return of Jesus as much as he possibly can, because he knows that when that happens, I'm going to lose.
Well, and that's, right? So one of the most helpful things, I think it was Joby who may have been the first one. So no, sorry, Joby here. This one's just shout out Joby. But I think he may have been the first person that, where it clicked with me. Satan is not omniscient, because I guess I had always thought of him as, I wouldn't have used the word omniscient, but I would have described how he attacks us, me specifically, as omniscient. Like he knows exactly what's going to happen. He doesn't. He is just an expert at my game film, and he has all of it, right? So he can't, read what I'm about to do. He doesn't really know the future, but man, he knows exactly what's gotten me off my rocker in the past. And I've talked to some of you guys here recently about, Satan gets really crafty, and, I kind of become a bit fearful when I feel like things get ramped up a little bit. Cause, I felt like, the attack on my voice a few years ago, for some of you that are new to the show, a couple of years ago, I had to have 2 vocal cord surgeries for a collapsed vocal cord. And in between surgeries, I couldn't talk above a whisper. And I'm talking to some of you guys about, hey, what's, anyone that's a UPS driver, are there any jobs where you can make a good living and not talk? Because those are the things that I have to consider now, because I can't talk above a whisper.
Mime school.
Yeah. It's like, how's Undaunted.Life going to survive? But God, that would be brutal. Just think about that. I'd rather go to clown college.
Kyle Thompson is a mime.
Wouldn't that be the worst?
It
would just be me flipping people off eventually, because I'd be so frustrated. I'd be like, hey, do you understand what I'm trying to communicate?
Yeah, how do you mime anger?
You just exist. You exist as a ginger. That's how you mime anger. You just wake up and start breathing. Well, hey, we need to kind of put a bow on Genesis 20 and 21 here, but we do have one more section to read. So we're going to read this last section, and then we're going to get some final comments. So I think Winkler, you read last. So Matt, bring that sultry voice into Genesis 21, starting in 22, and finish out the chapter.
At the time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my descendants, with my posterity. But as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me and with the land where you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. When Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart, and Abimelech said to Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore, that place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines.
All right, fellas, last thoughts on Genesis 20 and 21. Again, for some of you out there, like you're wondering, hey, why aren't we digging more so into this verse or this chapter, this story or whatever? At the forging table, we're just trying to give you some background as to what this would look like if men were just getting together, going through scripture like this. So yes, we can always go deeper on certain stories, but sometimes we're just trying to get through to keep this narrative going because we do have to have a flow to this. So any thoughts as we wrap up Genesis 21?
I think, I know this is not part of the last section that we read, but I think God's sovereignty to fulfill his purpose is really present here, and this is a really good example. Ishmael, like Sarah calls for Ishmael to leave several chapters before 21, and Abraham basically is like, well, she's your servant, you do with her what you want. And, you know, researching and listening to some sermons on culture of the time, the idea is that if she had sent him out, it was illegal, according to some ancient documents. It was illegal for the wife of the husband to send out a slave's or to like excommunicate a slave's son. But if the husband did it, it was okay. And so the speculation here is that had Sarah kicked Hagar and Ishmael out, he could have then come back as Isaac is weaned and they're celebrating him. And they're, probably he's the heir. He's the heir of this, all of Abraham's possessions. Ishmael could have come back and said, that's rightfully mine. I'm taking this because it was illegally taken from me. So God in his sovereignty staved that off, and then at the appropriate time said, all right, now he's gone because the son of promise is here. The son of promise has been born, and he is weaned, and he is ready to be the heir of this family and my future kingdom. Like, what a cool thing. Like, God is just incredible. So that was one thing that I just really stuck out to me. It was like, man, Sarah tried to get rid of him, and God said, no, not yet.
Not yet.
I like I look at verse 19 and I look at that and just kind of marvel at the grace of God. This is from a commentary I read yesterday, but it's remarkable to see in verse 19 the grace of God. Then God opened her eyes. The same God who divides the Red Sea and makes the Jordan dry up also opens a poor woman's eyes. The same God who came with all his chariots of fire to Paran, with all of his holy ones to Sinai, and made the mountain utterly to smoke in his presence, is he of whom we read, and God opened Hagar's eyes. It's just so simple. And it was literally just to save Ishmael. That's it. One person. He's doing all of these things. He's capable of all of these things. And yet here's the prayers of one woman. And Hagar's the only person in Genesis where you actually have, or only woman in Genesis, where you actually have 2 encounters with God. She's the only one that had 2 separate encounters with God. And there was nothing special about Hagar, or nothing special about her at all. Slave woman, concubine, didn't matter. God still had mercy and grace on her. So,
And on a similar note, just very practical, that one action by Abraham with Hagar has had millennia of repercussions. And so just from a, day-to-day thing for myself, in a culture where there's a whole lot of get what you want right now, no delayed gratification. It's easy for people like myself to just make decisions in the moment rather than to delay things. But even when I'm teaching kids, like there's great worth in delaying your gratification, putting things off and not just in the moment doing this stuff, because a lot of this stuff has some big ramifications if you go and mess up and do this one thing. So just a thought on that.
Guys, computers made noises. Water got spilled on laptops. Cell phones ended up under other people's feet. But somehow all those things had to do with Eric Browning, and we still made it to the end of the episode. And Eric gave us the last bit of commentary. So, guys, we made it. Congratulations to us, but we're going to have to leave it there. But come back here next week where we're going to be digging into Genesis 22. And I know everyone at this table has been very much so getting excited about that. That's going to get into the sacrifice of Isaac. So, guys, make sure you're read through Genesis 22, Genesis 22, so you can be ready for next week. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. We are affiliated with Crossway and Logos. So Crossway, there is a forging table starter set that if you want to get those 5 books, check out the show notes so you can get all those at a discount. And also Logos, the most powerful Bible software on the planet Earth, currently up on Eric Browning's wet laptop right now. So guys, if you want the best Bible study buddy thing that you can get on the entire planet, it is that software. So you can check that out and get it at a discount. And also we are a donation-based ministry. So if you want to be a part of our mission of getting all this type of content into the ears of guys all over the globe, hop on board and be a donor. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.